Okay, this is my presentation on Sacred Acre by Mark Tabb. I was assigned chapters 8 through 11, and I will get started with the summary. So chapters 8 through 11, beginning with chapter 8, this is following the tornado, obviously, that devastated the town. Ed and his wife, Jan, are both attempting to carry on their daily lives, with Ed having the summer football workouts beginning and Jan working as they're kind of coinciding with their community to work on the rebuild effort. This is working on their own house, but also helping out others in the community and working towards the pickup of the ruin that was left by the tornado. This creates a lot of stress for both of them. They're trying to balance both lives and really struggle to find time for each other. It creates a lot of high stress for both of them and presumably multiple others in the town that aren't featured in the book as much. Moving into chapter 9, the stress, I'll get to it later, but creates kind of a blurring of the distinguishment from role and self for Ed specifically, and Jan also, where their work lives and their community efforts are kind of being intertwined, and they're really their home life and their leisure activity is being degraded as a result of this. So in chapter 9, it focuses on Ed shifting his attention, kind of realizing that he needs some time away from all the chaos and busyness of being in Appleton, Parkersburg. He attends his son's wedding rehearsal and then eventual wedding, and follows through on a trip to a Yankees game in New York with his son Aaron that they have a good time at. Chapter 10, it starts out kind of, I guess it would be 20 years prior in 1975. Ed reflects on kind of how he got to AP, because he's going to be faced with a decision. He's, amidst all of the problems that are going on in town, he's got the opportunity to coach elsewhere where, it's definitely not as much of a high stress environment, not as much going on as far as football, and also having to deal with the effect on the city from the tornado that they're still dealing with, and the effects of the repairs at the school and what the students are dealing with and how they affect the community. So he reflects on that. That kind of guides him into what his calling is and why eventually he does decide he needs to lead at AP during this time, kind of culminating all that he's invested and what he wants to finish while he's in his time there. In chapter 11, the football season is now beginning. The summer workouts that were happening during the previous 3 chapters are pretty much concluded. The Falcons have their first game, which is a loss. They struggle to play as a team, which I will also reference later. Ed says that they're playing as individuals instead of a team, rather, and that he thinks that's why they lost to start the season. And then Ed follows this up with the importance of coming together, not only for their team and to have success, but also to set an example for their community and kind of unify the community towards a positive that can be the football team. So I'll get into my first of 5 connections. So this is early on in chapter 8. Ed is busy with the summer workouts and the rebuild of the town. He's very stressed out, but I believe it is page 108, one of the first pages of the chapter. I do have an ebook, so my pages might be slightly different. He turns to the Bible and references different verses that kind of relate to what he's dealing with, to clear his head and really stay focused on the matter at hand and why he's working so hard to balance football and also the pickup of the town. So he finds resolve in the Bible amidst everything that's going on in his life and creating stress for him, which in Leadership on the Line, I would consider this a sanctuary for him. He's taking time out of his day, and even throughout the day, he's keeping in the back of his head these messages that he can refer to from the Bible that kind of put things in perspective for him. And in Leadership of the Line, it outlines the importance of the sanctuary to remove stressors that a leader might accumulate. Leaders often are taking on the stress of others to guide them and lead, obviously. But then, we find a lot of examples of people not really dealing with the stress or having the support that they need in order to lead effectively. A quote from the book, page 204 of Leadership on the Line: "The rules and stresses of everyday life are suspended temporarily. It is not a place to hide, but a haven where you can cool down, capture lessons from the painful moments, and put yourself back together." Now, this is describing, what a sanctuary can be for people. Definitely for Ed here, he definitely has the stresses of his everyday life, but referencing that Bible gives him a little bit of time away. We talk about stepping out to the balcony also in Leadership on the Line. And while this isn't really a conflict, I mean, it is a conflict, but not between other people. He's able to gather himself out on that balcony before stepping in to back into his everyday life. And this really, the lessons from the Bible in the verses that he references that kind of signify what he's dealing with are the lessons from the painful moments of the devastation of the tornado, where he is not only putting himself back together with things that he's struggling with, but also the community that is having to do this also. Second connection, once again, Ed and Jan are still consumed by their jobs. They finally have time to come home from one another. There's a story on page 119 where as soon as Ed gets home, he's called almost as soon as they engage in conversation to leave the house again. But Jan really understands this. She's sympathetic towards it. She knows this is likely something, although not referenced in the text, that she's had to do also. So that distinction of role and self, where the role of their work in the community is carrying over to their role of their self, and they're having a hard time separating that amidst the vast amount of just work that needs to be done. So they're almost driven apart. They don't have a lot of time for each other. Definitely not a lot of time to reflect on themselves and kind of relax, I would guess. But once again, as I referred to in the summary, Ed recognizes the importance of really not driving himself into the ground and focusing elsewhere, in which he attends his son Todd's wedding and the Yankee game. The distinction between role and self is absolutely necessary. And the separation of two, which is focused on in the text, Leadership on the Line, keeps work relationships and, home or outside relationships kind of intact while not being overwhelmed by each other. When those lines start crossing is when, the people involved with either aspect are, neglected in a sense from a personal relationship standpoint. Quote from the book: "Confusing role with self is a trap. Even though you may put all of yourself into your role, your passion, values, and artistry, the people in your setting will be reacting to you, not primarily as a person, but as the role you take in their lives." And I really related this to Ed focusing on the events with his sons. That stuff probably meant a lot to them. They're also dealing with the repercussions of the devastation in the town, but knowing that their dad is going to be there for them, and that reaction to them is likely more meaningful than anything he could ever rebuild within the town, although just maybe as important. Not confusing your role as a worker with your family that is relying on you for emotional support. Third connection between Sacred Acre and Leadership on the Line, as I talked about in the summary, the Falcons lose their first game, and Ed calls a practice to address the issues deeper than football. Now, unbeknownst to the team, they're not obviously excited for this practice. They experience the loss just like Ed, not happy about it, and they think they're just going to get reamed for their performance in the game. Ed opens this discussion prior to practice that, he's aware and the team is all aware that they didn't play to their ability, but that's not the focus of what he's talking about. He describes the trajectory of their season through an analogy that really grips the attention of the players. He discusses a bouncy ball or a ball in a can of beans that sinks to the bottom. Now, what he's saying here is that the ball isn't going to be held up, by just being alone. And he's referencing the sense of individuality that the team and the players on the team are playing with, not playing for each other, but for themselves instead. Then he shakes up the can of beans and the ball rises to the top. This is, the team working together to raise the ball, and having, a better result, a support to the ball, so to say, that can be accomplished through the teamwork. Now, after this, he slams the can of beans on the wall and it explodes, saying that this is what is going to happen to the team if they don't start working together. The season could implode and not be what they need it to be for themselves and for the community. So they leave that with a focused sense of accountability as a group, leading to improvements in their game. They win the next game 40-6. And what really happened here, which is referenced in Leadership on the Line, is Ed is raising the heat. Raising the heat is a technique described to capture the attention of a group. It can be used to inspire people, and definitely the players were inspired by this increase in intensity, and they were ready to move forward with their season and make the necessary improvements that needed to happen to play at the level that they want to. So I have another connection. It's outside of the book. It's a connection to my individual service project. So following the tornado, Ed and others in the community step up to aid those that had their life uprooted, literally and figuratively. In times of devastation on this scale, the help and reliance of others is sometimes all that these people have to give them hope. Now, to put that into perspective, some lost everything. They're starting over with nothing. They're having to go through the ruin that has become their life. And all they really have is the support of others that are willing to step up and help them and be by them through this time, to guide them, because it's a very dark place for those people. I think about my ISP, which I am volunteering at CASA in DeKalb County, which is where I live in Illinois, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates for Children. So what this is it's a nonprofit organization. People from the community represent neglected and abused children in the courts. Maybe these children are in foster care or have been taken away from their parents for whatever reason. They have been neglected. And these people that step up with their time, and it takes a lot of effort going through the court process, I've learned, they advocate for these kids who really, some of them are too young, and they can't really advocate for themselves. They know they're in a bad spot, but they don't really know what they can do about it. So this is a person in the community, a leader, stepping up for them to advocate for them, which is really important to the children, that they have someone kind of on their side throughout, a process that no one really wants to go through, but also for the children. If no one else is looking out for them, they can't really begin to look out for themselves, which is a lot like the situation in the town, where if no one is willing to guide and kind of establish a sense of hope for these people that have had their lives destroyed, it's really hard for them to have that sense of hope within themselves. My final connection is to the legacy. We worked on the legacy and mission statement worksheet last week. We determined kind of really what we wanted our legacy to be through our mission statement and how we want to enact that statement into our everyday life. So when Ed is faced with a decision to move on from Appleton's Parkersburg for a job elsewhere, or he can stay to see the town through fruition, even though he's faced with a lot of challenges going on with the rebuild. So the quote from Sacred Acre is, Appleton Parkersburg was Ed's mission field, his choice, his church, the place in which God called him to make a difference in the lives of students. So this is Ed kind of thinking about his decision to either move on or stay. And he's thinking that this place is his mission. He's feeling called to do his work here, where he can make a difference in this time of, I would call it transition, where the town is being rebuilt and they can either be better from it and have a sense of appreciation for what they have, or they can really dwell on it, and it can, that something like that can really ruin the town for a long period of time in terms of attitude and hope. So just as we did as a class when considering our legacy, our leadership mission statement and desired legacy, Ed had to reflect on what was important to leave the legacy he wanted in AP. If he leaves, he's leaving these people that look up to him in the community, as he's a huge figure, almost on their own, even though he has helped so much. That's the sense that he could potentially give off when that's not what he wants to do. He cares deeply about the people, deeply about the program and the town in and of itself. And so his legacy is that he wants to help out with that and stay and guide this team and this town through this process. He understood the impact of his influence on the players, specifically also the people of the town and his help there. But guiding him in his decision to stay is this understanding of the impact that he has. So my discussion question for the class relating to Ed's legacy and mission, kind of epiphany that he has through that decision-making process is, does Ed's calling and mission reflect any similarities in the mission statement that you created? If yes, explain. If not, are there any aspects you would consider and why? So within what I mean by that, within the mission statement that you may have wrote for class, do you see any similarities in the thought process that he had regarding his legacy and the impact that he wants to have through his influence? And then if not, are there anything that you would consider altering your statement and adding, or at least considering for your own legacy and how you want to live that Ed is an example of? My references are both of the books, and that concludes my presentation.